It was a quiet night on Vancouver Island in the early 90s, the kind where the fog rolled in and the air was thick with the scent of saltwater. The streets of my neighborhood were calm, but the undercurrent of fear was palpable. A child had been abducted from a nearby park, a case that was becoming more and more high profile by the day. I was just 3 years old when it happened, but even now, the story sticks with me. At the time, my dad, a rookie cop, was barely a few years into his career. He had joined the force, eager to serve and protect. But little did he know that one night, his encounter with a man named Peter Hogben would change everything. The kidnap case hung over the island like a dark cloud, and every law enforcement officer was on edge, looking for any clues, any lead that might lead them to the missing child. A tense encounter. It all started when my dad, along with his partner and a camera guy tagging along to film some kind of Canadian version of Cops, were patrolling the streets. The camera guy was just there to capture whatever mundane activity they might run across, a far cry from the intense moments that were about to unfold. At the time, ride-alongs were an unusual occurrence, especially for camera crews, but this night felt different. It was one of those nights where everything seemed quiet, and everyone hoped for nothing more than a routine shift. But then, as my dad was driving through the neighborhood, he spotted a familiar work van. It was Peter Hogben's van, and my dad had pulled him over a few days prior for driving without insurance. The guy had a dead chicken hanging from his rearview mirror, an odd and unsettling detail that made the entire interaction feel off. But back then, my dad let him go with a warning. However, tonight was different. As they approached the van again, my dad had it run through dispatch, and sure enough, Hogben's vehicle came back with expired insurance. Without hesitation, my dad turned on the lights and pulled the van over. As they got out of the patrol car, Hogben immediately began yelling, his eyes wide, his face twisted with rage. My dad remembers feeling the intensity of the moment. Hogben wasn't just angry, he was irrationally furious, his veins bulging out of his neck as he got up in their faces. It was one of those moments where you could feel the tension in the air, and my dad had to instinctively place his hand on his holster, prepared for whatever might come next. His partner did the same, their bodies tense with readiness. Though police shootings were a rarity in the 90s, the situation felt volatile. Hogben was out of control. Despite the escalating situation, my dad and his partner stayed calm, explaining that they would tow his van for the expired insurance. Hogben wasn't hearing any of it, though. He was far beyond reason. What happened next still shocks my dad to this day. Hogben, in a fit of rage, began to destroy the dashboard of his own van with his bare hands. He kicked, punched, and tore at the interior like an animal, completely losing himself in the frenzy. My dad and his partner stood by, ready to intervene if necessary, but Hogben wasn't turning his rage on them, not yet anyway. After a while, Hogben abruptly stopped, his anger dissipating as quickly as it had arrived. Calmly, he asked if he could retrieve his tools from the back of the van. He was a construction worker, and apparently, he needed the tools for work the next day. My dad, though unsettled, said he could go ahead. Hogben grabbed an axe, a tool belt with a hammer, and other construction gear, and then walked off into the night without another word. As he disappeared into the darkness, my dad's partner muttered, "Jesus, he looks mad enough to kill someone." It was a chilling remark, but they had no idea just how accurate it was. The camera guy, still filming, had caught every moment on tape. As the van was towed away, my dad and his partner could only reflect on how weird the entire incident had been. But they didn't think much of it. They were just glad it was over. What they didn't know was that Hogben's rage wasn't spent. A horrifying discovery. The next day, things took a turn. During their briefing at the station, my dad and his partner learned that a woman had been brutally beaten to death just the night before. Her body was found early in the morning, and the detectives were already gathering clues. As the officers discussed the case, my dad and his partner exchanged a look, both of them instantly thinking the same thing. "I think we know who did this," my dad's partner had said, his voice low. They raised their hands, signaling that they had a suspect. Peter Hogben was arrested shortly after. It didn't take long for the evidence to stack up against him. Hogben, it turned out, had been following another woman the night before, but she had been lucky enough to get inside her house before he could do anything to her. The woman he did kill, however, was completely random. He had beaten her to death with the blunt end of an axe, leaving behind blood and DNA evidence. The scene was chilling. As the investigation into the murder unfolded, the FBI's behavioral unit got involved. They had been working on the case of the missing child, Michael Donaghy, and they were particularly interested in the tape of Hogben's earlier outburst. They'd caught wind of the footage and immediately asked to see it. After reviewing the video, they explained how rare it was to witness the exact moment when a psychopath snaps and decides to kill. The footage was so valuable to them that they wanted to take it back to Quantico for training purposes, to show recruits what that moment looked like. That's how my dad and his partner ended up in a video that was used in FBI training. It was surreal to think that something so ordinary, something that was part of their everyday routine, had turned into a tool for law enforcement across the country. But it also haunted my dad. His partner, especially, struggled with the remark he had made about Hogben being mad enough to kill someone. It wasn't their fault. They had followed protocol, had done their jobs. But there's always that question in the back of your mind. What if we had done something differently? The missing child. But there was another part to this story, something that still lingers to this day. Michael Donaghy, the child who had been abducted from the park just days before Hogben's violent outburst, was still missing. The case had grown colder with every passing day, and no one knew where he had gone. The FBI's behavioral unit had assisted in profiling the abductor, but there were still no solid leads. The kidnapper's identity remained a mystery, and the possibility that it was a family member or someone close to Michael was just as likely as a stranger abduction. Michael's disappearance became a haunting presence in the lives of the people on Vancouver Island. His name was whispered among parents and children alike, a cautionary tale about the dangers of strangers. My friends and I would often fantasize about solving the case ourselves. Once, we even found some deer bones in the woods and convinced ourselves that we had found Michael's remains. It was just a childhood fantasy, but it was also a reflection of the fear that gripped the island during those years. And then, there was my mom, a new chapter in the years that followed. My mom became a police officer too. She worked her way up, from jail duty to the patrol division, where she was paired with an FTO, a training officer, to learn the ropes. Patrol was one of the most dangerous divisions. Officers were often alone, out on the streets, with no backup nearby. It was the kind of job that kept you on edge every day. One night, my mom and her FTO received a call about a suicidal man with a gun holed up in his house. They raced to the scene, parking several yards away as they had been trained. The house was situated on the outskirts of town, in a semi-rural area near a school and daycare. Everything about the scene felt off. My mom and her FTO got out of the car and started to approach the house. Then, without warning, a gunshot rang out. My mom and her FTO ducked behind the patrol car for cover, their hearts pounding in their chests. The shots kept coming, and it wasn't clear where the man was firing from. In the chaos, another shot was fired, and the situation went from bad to worse. But then, something strange happened. Amid the chaos, the sound of a school bell rang out across the night. The eerie chime echoed through the air, sending shivers down my mom's spine. What did it mean? Was it just a coincidence? Or was something more sinister at play? The school bell rang, signaling the end of another chaotic day for the 1,000 middle school students. The hallways buzzed with excitement as kids gathered their belongings, chatting with friends, and scrambling to exit as quickly as possible. It was always like this, the hustle and bustle of school letting out, the relief of the day ending, and the anticipation of freedom. Some students would board the buses, others would pile into their cars, and a few, like me, would walk home, trying to avoid the rush as best as possible. For some, the end of the school day was a joyful, carefree moment, but for others, it was a moment filled with dread of what might await them at home. But I didn't know then, as I gathered my things to leave, that the world around me was about to erupt into chaos. And it was a chaos I couldn't possibly have prepared for. The suspect had heard that bell too, and he didn't waste a single second. Without hesitation, he bolted for his RV parked just outside the school grounds, racing toward the chaos that was about to unfold. Officers had been tailing him for some time now, but he was desperate, and in his desperation, he was willing to do anything. He fired shots at the officers, narrowly missing them, but making it clear that he was not about to go down quietly. It was a mad chase, a race against time, with officers trying everything they could to stop him. They aimed for his tires, fired at his engine, anything they could do to halt his progress and prevent him from reaching the school. The sound of the sirens and gunshots pierced the air as the pursuit continued, the tension mounting with every passing second. But then, the radio call came in, shattering any hope of normalcy for that day. "Officer down. Officer down." The voice crackled through the comms, a mix of panic and urgency that sent a chill down my spine. My heart raced, but the pursuit didn't slow. It couldn't. There was no time to waste. The school was too close, and the officers knew that if they didn't stop him now, he could do far worse. The chaos on the radio intensified. "Who's hit? Are they alive?" Voices cried out in the background, desperate for answers, praying that the situation wouldn't worsen. And then, as if the night couldn't get any worse, someone shouted the words that would haunt me forever. "It's my mom. She's been shot." Those words stopped me cold. The world seemed to freeze around me as I processed what I had just heard. The person on the other end of the radio was someone I knew, someone I trusted. My mom was in danger, but I didn't know how or why. Within minutes, my phone lit up with texts. Everyone seemed to be asking the same thing. If I knew what was happening, if I was okay. Some messages were more blunt, simply saying, "Your mom's been shot." I was at work. I had no idea what was happening. My mind raced as I scrambled to process the words. My mom shot? It felt like a bad dream, a nightmare I couldn't escape. The messages kept coming, one after the other. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I stepped out into the hallway, trying to escape the noise and confusion that filled the room. I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. And then it hit me, the crushing reality. My mom was gone. She was dead, or worse, she was dying. The thought was too much to bear. I could hardly keep myself standing. I felt like the floor was falling out beneath me, my body heavy and numb, unable to process the weight of it all. And then came the radio call. "The threat has been neutralized. The suspect is down." There was a brief pause, and for a moment, I dared to hope that everything might be okay. But still, there was no word about my mom. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look, but I had to. With trembling hands, I checked the screen. "Hey, I don't know what you heard, but I'm okay. I wasn't the one that got shot." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. My mom was okay. She was safe. But my heart still ached with the terror of not knowing if it had been her, or someone else close to me. The thought of losing her was unbearable, but the truth was much worse than I could have imagined. The suspect, in his desperation, had taken down a SWAT deputy at point-blank range. The deputy had been rushed to the hospital unconscious, his body already showing signs of trauma. The situation had been dire. They fought to save him, using every tool at their disposal to keep him alive, but it wasn't enough. His heart stopped. He was gone, but the doctors weren't giving up. They used electric shock therapy, shocking his heart back into rhythm. And then, his heart stopped again. The doctors weren't finished. They shocked him once more, desperate to keep him alive. It took everything they had, and even after that, during emergency surgery, his heart stopped again. The doctor had to hold his heart in his hands, squeezing it to make it beat again. Against all odds, the deputy survived. It wasn't easy. He had lost a lot of blood, brain cells, motor function, but he survived. And for that, I was grateful. Grateful that the officers had taken down the suspect. And even more thankful that my mom was safe. But the chaos didn't end there. Hours later, I received another call. A new case had come in a missing husband. He had told his wife and 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but he hadn't returned in over 12 hours. No one knew where he was. The wife assumed he had gone to the other house they owned, a place where their relationship had been strained. It was just the kind of thing he would do, she thought, but there was something about the case that didn't sit right with me. Earlier that morning, the husband had emptied his entire personal bank account into his wife's account. It was a strange, almost unsettling gesture. When I asked the son if there were any places his father liked to visit in the mountains, he mentioned a road about 10 miles away. The description rang a bell. It was a lonely, desolate road I had seen before, one that didn't see much traffic. It was nearing midnight when I decided to check it out. I didn't have much to go on, but something in my gut told me I would find him up there. Either he was contemplating something drastic, or something worse had already happened. The old, snow-covered road stretched out before me, deserted, the eerie silence of the mountains swallowing everything around me. There were no recent tire tracks, no signs of life. It was just me in the cold, biting air. By the time I reached the top of the road, I hadn't found his truck. I was disappointed, but tried to dismiss the feeling gnawing at me. Maybe it was just my gut instinct misfiring. But then, as I headed back down, I saw it. A small, unmapped road veering off the main one. It was my last chance. I turned onto it, and sure enough, my headlights illuminated the back of a black truck. I didn't need to check the license plate. I already knew. I radioed in, parked, and walked toward the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step felt like an eternity. When I reached the truck, I opened the door and found the man inside. He had taken his own life. The scene was gruesome, one I'll never forget. Blood splattered everywhere. The sight was enough to make my stomach turn. For 3 hours, I sat in the cold, waiting for the body removal team. The snow continued to fall, and I was left with nothing but my thoughts. And then came the worst part of all, going back to the family. They were waiting for good news, but I had none to give, only the harsh reality of what had happened. I had to break their hearts. That moment still haunts me to this day. The faces of the children, the wife, all waiting for news that would never come. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I know some of you are wondering where I've been. I owe you an explanation, but I don't think this is the best place to start. I'll be addressing everything in an upcoming live stream. I'll explain what's been happening, where I've been, and what's coming next. So after this video, I'll be putting out 1 or 2 more before I do that live stream. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss it. Or follow me on Twitter or Snapchat for updates. Thanks again for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Have an awesome day.